What's up, YouTube? So, some people watching my channel gave me the suggestion of making more shorter topical videos in addition to the streams. So, I'm gonna go ahead and try to do that. So, the topic of this video is the social sciences. As I've shared on this channel, my own background is coming from linguistics. Linguistics, along with fields like economics, psychology, communication, and many other fields typically fall under this umbrella of what we call the social sciences. Now, people often will look at the social sciences and contrast them with the so-called hard sciences like physics or biology, something like that. So you you might be wondering, if the social sciences, they are not so rigorous, they are not finding out facts in the same way that these larger, bigger, more mathy disciplines are, then why are social sciences receiving so much funding? What is social science for? So, outside of my own studies and stuff in school, I started to read around about the history of the social sciences, where the social sciences come from, and also looking at other fields of the social sciences and the direction my own field, linguistics, was going into. And I was quite surprised to find how closely it is related to other so-called STEM fields and the hard sciences. So let me just make one quick point here. We could make a contrast between science and engineering. So science, we could talk about this as theories of cause and effect relationships. So if you're doing science, you're trying to find out, you have this and this and this event, stimulus, whatever you're looking at, and then something happens as a result of that. Engineering, on the other hand, could be thought of as the application of scientific knowledge. So these are not super precise definitions, but I think that it is worth making this distinction when we're talking about what exactly these things do. So oftentimes, like, for example, you might say, oh, what's a person going to do with a theoretical physics degree? What you're going to do with the theoretical physics degree, probably push forward, do some more experiments, go into academics, research, and learn more about physics. Develop some theory further, find out the problems, this sort of thing. On the other hand, if you're going to go and become like an aerospace engineer or something, then you're going to work with scientific knowledge that has already been gathered. So someone comes up with some big theoretical framework and so on and so forth, and then you apply that in order to engineer and to make things. So surprising to me at the time, so at least a couple years ago, I started to think about this question and how it applied to the social sciences. So in the social sciences, we could talk about there being science in the sense that there's theories about how language works, for instance. So for a long time, one thing that people were doing was looking at generative approaches made famous by Noam Chomsky. So if I pull up some images here, you're probably going to see all sorts of fancy trees and stuff. So how do you generate a sentence from certain principles? I won't get too much into the specifics of this sort of thing, but I will just say that Chomsky also was involved in theoretical computer science, and a lot of the stuff that was and continues to be linguistics research, the directions of linguistics and computers go hand in hand. So people are looking at analyzing natural languages in the same way that computer languages are parsed. And now we could see how, for instance, machine learning is applied using services like Google Translate, similarly to how all that AI stuff is used to do a recognition of images, self-driving cars, all that sort of stuff. So the so-called hard sciences and the social sciences relate in many ways. Anyways, going back to the main topic at hand here. So science and engineering. So the science, we could say, for the social sciences is how these larger social phenomena work. So psychology dealing with people, brains, how do people think, how do people respond to stuff. And then you could look at linguistics as what is language, and how does communication work. So what would the engineering side of that be? This is where things necessarily must take a slightly sinister turn. You may have heard the term social engineering. So there's social science, and we could look at social engineering. Let's look at some definitions. Okay, so this one looks like we have some rather security-oriented definitions. That's okay. All right, social engineering is the art of manipulating people so that they give up confidential information. So it's talking about how criminals might use social engineering techniques, for example, to convince you to give you a password or access to an account, something like that. Now, if you have understanding of psychology, like a scientific understanding of psychology, a scientific understanding of language, you know how feelings and all sorts of these things work, then if you are choosing to deceive and manipulate people, which of course we do not recommend here on this channel, then you could get results. For example, having people give up confidential information. And then I think Wikipedia here too had it's a kind of information security related definition. We could look at it really quick. In the context of information security, social engineering is a psychological manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. Let's see, this differs from social engineering within the social sciences, which does not concern the divulging of confidential information. So, yeah, you're not having people give up confidential information, but the idea is similar in that you're understanding how people work, so that's the science aspect. And then once you understand how people work, then you could do engineering. You could apply technique in order to get people to do stuff or to have certain attitudes or to think stuff that you want them to think. So, how does this look in practice? I found a very revealing article here. So, I'm not going to say my own views about all these things, but let us just look at this article I have up on the screen titled "Words Got Us into the Anti-Pokemon Crisis. Here's How They'll Get Us Out." And the subtitle, researchers are studying ways to keep misinformation from spreading, from exposing data voids and minding sentence structure. Okay, so the way that we're going to look at this article is, how does this article reveal the sort of linguistic or social science, language science that people are looking at? So what is the state of the knowledge of that? And what is the engineering that's being used? What sort of techniques does this article implicitly mention? Of course, this article is framing as these particular people being the bad guys. But looking at this article, it could be very educational no matter what your view might be on this subject. So let's take a look. So I'm just scrolling down. Don't have to read it all. You could read it if you want. So it's just talking about how people will put together particular words, search terms, right, into Google or another search engine, and then certain words will lead people to what they call a data void. So let me read this one section. So the top results for that query, I won't say what the query was, have shifted to the CDC, the FDA, and reputable news outlets like Reuters. But in those early weeks, there was just enough of a dearth of good information that some bad to squeeze in, a phenomenon known in computer science as data void. So people might search a combination of words, and then the mainstream sources did not yet have like a net. They didn't have metadata tags, whatever it was, to capture people searching those terms. So then if you search certain words, you could find stuff that's very different from the establishment narrative. You could look at, so one other easy way in which this sort of stuff could often happen is in the United States, where I'm in, most people are searching stuff in English. So if you search things in English, you always kind of get the same sorts of results, even if you type different combinations of words. But if you went and you read like Hungarian Wikipedia, for example, there's a high chance that you're going to find some spicy, interesting information that you wouldn't necessarily find in the English Wikipedia. Similarly, if you searched keywords in a language that doesn't really have much people paying attention to it, I don't know, Cambodian, for instance, then you might be able to find a lot of stuff because as the language you're using is less supported, it's what they call a data void in this article. All right. So here we have, looking at this article, we have an intersection of linguistic knowledge. So we could look at the way in which people search terms. We have a lot of data, just collected observations, empirical data about if people are wondering things, how do they phrase those queries? How do they ask Google that question? So that's science, right? We could look at the manner in which people ask stuff. Now, the engineering aspect is like this. Oftentimes, there's these edge cases, so people might find different combinations of words, and if your system doesn't catch it, then your engineering work is not complete. Your engineering has to be good enough such that you catch all the ways that people might search a thing in order to continue to give them the particular sorts of results that you want to show them. All right, so let us scroll down. So here, basically, they admitted a sort of vulnerability, a trouble with the way that search engine result type stuff had been engineered. There's a lot of information, the so-called misinformation, that they don't want people to see. So how is it, even if you're trying to steer people away from it, that somehow people get around it, they get through to it? Well, it would be through these data voids, uncommon combinations of words that they didn't prepare for yet. That will sometimes land people at that sort of stuff that they don't want them to see. Okay, more state of the science. So the author of this article says, but if words helped get us into this mess, they might be able to get us out of it too. All right, here they continue. Words have always been precision instruments in spreading and communicating ideas. From urban legends to public health campaigns, outright propaganda to catchy political turns of phrase. The sticky nature of a term like Green New Deal highlights the evocative power of words, as does the success of the term death tax, which drives voter interest far more than the anodyne name estate tax. The internet, of course, made words more powerful than ever. An entire field of work now focuses on the use of specific words to drive search engine algorithms. Keywords power the ads delivered on Google and Facebook. They signal what's trending on Twitter in a perpetual news cycle. They serve as shorthand for what's important. Okay, so here, let's look again. What is the sort of scientific data that we're looking at? The scientific data, so they named like keywords, right? We have knowledge about how people tend to search stuff. And then also here we have knowledge too about what sorts of words combinations, such as something like death tax. Like there's a science to creating a clickbait title for a YouTube video. Maybe I need to work on my own understanding of this particular science. A knowledge of the thing. Then there's the application of it, the engineering to it, which is, all right, so we know that clickbait headlines get more clicks. We know that keywords are oftentimes how people search for it. Now, how do we use this knowledge in order to steer people to do what we want them to do? That's the engineering, the social engineering application of the social science here. All right, so then here's a quote summarizing all that stuff that was up here. It says, if you come up with certain phrases that haven't been put together before, they're like magical keys that take you to crazy places. And that's by this computer science professor at Northeastern University. I believe they're the ones who sponsored this article. All right. So then this Lauser professor has more to say. Okay, yeah, so here let's look at science again. So he's criticizing President Trump's name. He says, for instance, he thinks the naming process of developing the COVID vaccine, Operation Warp Speed, was an unforced error, right? So we could just look at this empirically. Did this phrase kind of catch on? Did people embrace and like this term? And then the analysis here, he says, I understand the sentiment, trying to do this as quickly as possible, but it was terrible. And then it talks about other key terms that have been launched, such as breakthrough infections. Right, let's see. Okay. Now we have something revealing, so let me just read this paragraph really quick. So it's talking about a particular problem. The challenge is that once a problematic term is coined, it can quickly take hold. In the 2008 book, Predicting New Words, a forensic linguist, Alan Metcalf, developed fudge, a mnemonic for elements that help novel terms become a permanent part of the language. Short for frequency, unobtrusiveness, diversity, generating new forms and meanings, and endurance. And many of its concepts translate easily to internet culture. Frequency takes the shape of trending topics and hashtags, generating new forms and meanings. It's a good encapsulation of the life cycle of a meme. Blah, blah, blah. So it talks about how repeating something over and over is useful. It's called the illusory truth effect. Yeah, and so on and so forth. So this article, by revealing and talking about lots of these social science ideas, talks about the very things that are used by parties of all sorts, right? Especially the establishment, the people that sponsor a lot of this social science research. So I'm sure it would not take much effort if you scrolled through a newspaper or something to identify certain key phrases that get repeated again and again in order to make you internalize them and the associated messages, feelings, whatever it is that they want you to like. So I'll just give two examples. One of them is safe and effective. So sounds nice, safe and effective. And by repeating this, almost like a mantra or a magic formula, you're supposed to internalize the message that comes with it. And then likewise, this slogan, like build back better, with reference to, stuff is getting shaken up with the economy. Now, let us look forward, be optimistic about how a restructuring of how stuff is could involve constructing something better than we know. Anyways, there's more to go on with this article, but that's just to say, with linguistics, right, there's a type of science to it. Linguistics, psychology, all the social sciences. There's a sort of science of it, which is a predictive model of how people act and respond to stuff. And the engineering aspect of that sort of thing that we see is a lot of this stuff that when we take a step back and think about it, you might think, wow, that's kind of messed up that people would do that to you. I thought they only did that in communist China. But lo and behold, yes, in all nations around the world, you see this sort of stuff. And the sorts of messaging, the sorts of targeting they do is going to be different depending on what the groups they're targeting are, what they want you to think and what they want you to do. But yes, there is a real science to all of this. Okay, so to conclude this video, I just want to bring up a couple more key words, key topics that are related to this. So there's a lot of stuff that has been going on for a long time, but often slips under people's radar. So, for example, like I got into linguistics because I like to study foreign languages. I think it's fun. I figured, well, go to some more school, learn about more linguistics, learn some more languages. Yeah, university is cool. They just teach you things so we could have a more educated society. We could all hang out and be smart. But that's not how it works, right? Certainly a lot of learning and good conversations go on within universities. But a lot of the times there's very practical stuff that's going on as well. And practical in the sense that they want people to understand and apply these techniques. They want people to do the science, finding out what works with language so that people as a career could do this social engineering type of work. And if you look at where sorts of degrees and stuff with areas like communications and things go, you'll find that oftentimes basically you're generating propaganda and trying to sway the public to think people, these people are good guys or something like that. So couple terms. The first one here, public relations. So this is the name of an industry, probably when you're filing your taxes. If you're in some sort of public relations field, there's probably a drop-down entry for it. So what does Wikipedia say public relationships is? Let's take a look. It says public relations, or PR, is the practice of managing and disseminating information from an individual or an organization, such as a business, government agency, or a nonprofit organization, to the public in order to affect their public perception. So people might be skeptical of a thing. Well, you do a PR campaign in order to make people ready to embrace the changes that you have planned. Maybe people are uncomfortable with something, so you want to present them with information to no longer be uncomfortable with that thing, to find something as familiar and non-intrusive, whatever it is. So PR there. And let's see. Yeah, so what is PR? I'm just pulling an article from Forbes here. And just a couple of things about what they do. So here it says, PR is the persuasion business. So here, talking about the sort of engineering, you have science, how stuff works. Then you could look at the applied art of that. Like I'm holding up this book here called Influence by this Robert Cialdini fellow. And Influence, his book is The Psychology of Persuasion. It tells you about how to sell used cars. That's one application you could use the techniques in this for, but you could also use it to do public relations campaigns and other stuff. All right, continuing. PR people are storytellers. They create narratives to advance their agenda. PR can be used to protect, enhance, or build reputations through the media, social media, or self-produced communications. So it's just saying what they do. If you're a PR person, this is your job. And we know that whether we're talking about NGOs, governments, corporations, right? All these people have teams working on this PR stuff. So this is all open. This is not tinfoil hat talk. This is just what these people do. Okay. And just lastly, I wanted to bring attention to this one guy, Edward Bernays. So if you look at the history of the social sciences, look at the history of a lot of the different fields today that people might study at a university, such as psychology, then you could look at how these sciences, the social sciences, have been applied throughout history. So this Edward Bernays fellow, what is said about him? He was an American pioneer in the field of public relations, which we just looked at, and propaganda, referred to in his obituary as the father of public relations. Bernays was named one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life. That's Life magazine. Yeah, and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, so you could look at what he's done. Let's just skip down and look at his techniques really quick. Right, so third parties. Bernays argued that the covert use of third parties was morally legitimate because those parties were morally autonomous actors. And we have a quote here. If you can influence the leaders either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group which they sway, he said. In order to promote sales of bacon, for example, he conducted research and found that the American public ate very light breakfast of coffee, maybe a roll, and orange juice. He went to his physician and found that a heavy breakfast was sounder from the standpoint of health than a light breakfast because the body loses energy during the night and needs it during the day. He asked the physician if he would be willing, at no cost, to write to 5,000 physicians and ask them whether their judgment was the same as his, confirming his judgment. About 4,500 answered back, all concurring that a more significant breakfast was better for the health of the American people than a light breakfast. He arranged for his finding to be published in newspapers throughout the country with headlines like 4,500 physicians urge bigger breakfasts, while other articles stated that bacon and eggs should be a central part of breakfast, and as a result of these actions, the sale of bacon went up. Absolutely subversive. So you could go on and read about what Edward Bernays did, what he said, how he applied various studies, looking at things like mass psychology, application of techniques developed in the social sciences, the engineering of consent, all these juicy topics. So, yes. I think I'll just wrap this book by saying, we talk about, hey, let's all study STEM. Should you be a computer programmer, get a job, work for Google, and so on and so forth. And I think the social sciences are kind of sometimes brushed under the rug as sort of, maybe one way to put it would be like useless, irrelevant, soft sciences, not real science. But they are far more real and active, I think, than a lot of people would like to give them credit for. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you're going to look at it, the way in which they are applied often is in what you would call propaganda or engineering consent in some way. Anyways, that's my brief rant here about science, engineering, the social sciences, and how these things are being applied today. I hope you found this talk educational, and I encourage you to check out the other content on my channel. Leave comments, like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and thank you for viewing this video.